Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you say to a small child when you don't want them drawing on your walls?
I don't know. What do you say?
Scribble not! Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your giant red hammer host, Madelyn.
I'm your gargantuan chained friend, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. On this week's podcast, our two games are Scribblenauts and Chained Echoes, which I thought we were talking about a few weeks ago. And we are talking about it this week, I hope. I had a lot of paranoia about that as I was researching it.
You can always ask me.
I double-checked on the blog. I trusted you on the blog.
Okay.
I was too embarrassed to ask you. So, after the latest Chained Echoes debacle. But That's our new game. Sort of. Our new old game. Our new game that feels old. Let's start with Scribble.
I understand what you mean, but...
I'm just talking in circles. It's Scribblenauts time! I didn't realize Scribblenauts was by the same people as Drawn to Life. I thought they were two kind of coincidentally similar vibed DS games.
Nope.
Anyway, Scribblenauts is a 2009 action puzzle game from Fifth Cell, now mostly defunct. Now mostly defunct. Published by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment, originally for the Nintendo DS. And yes, the same studio that made Drawn to Life, which we did own. I think we might have had Scribblenauts.
Oh yeah. I think we had more than one Scribblenauts.
It didn't make a strong impression on me.
Really? I remember playing it a lot.
Well, then...
I hogged it from you, clearly.
Apparently. I remember it vaguely. I just don't remember, it just didn't, stick with me.
I guess so.
Anyway, I got the one that's available for Switch and played a little bit of that.
Oh, the bad one?
Well, no, not the party game one.
Oh, not the party. There's one on the Switch that's not the party game?
Yeah, they have the Scribblenauts Mega Pack, which includes Scribblenauts Unlimited and Scribblenauts Unmasked. So I did not choose the DC Comics one. I played a little bit of Scribblenauts Unlimited, which is sort of like open world Scribblenauts, from what I understand.
I feel like we had the DC one.
I barely remember having the normal one, so I'm going to defer to your memory here.
But I feel like maybe.
The DC one came out in 2013, so it's plausible that you had it and I was busy being in college.
That's true. Maybe we didn't have it then. I wasn't thinking about the timeline of my life. Because I don't often.
Yeah. Anyway, in Scribblenauts, if you haven't heard of it, that's Scribblenauts, not like Scribble Not in the opening joke, but Scribblenauts like, scribbling astronauts. Mm-hmm. You play as Maxwell. You're a kid with a magic notebook that can summon whatever you write in it as long as it's family friendly and not owned by another company. And you use that to solve puzzles, which you're rewarded for with starites, which are, your classic little gamey reward item thing. And you're just trying to make the world a better place with your magic notebook.
Yes, the first Scribblenauts, the 2009 one, only had nouns. Mm-hmm. And then in Super Scribblenauts, they added the adjective functionality so that you could adjust the properties of whatever noun you were spawning. So like edible, for example.
The adjective or the noun?
The adjective, edible. You could put... I don't think they would let you spawn an edible noun.
Do you think you could spawn an edible?
Or, as I said earlier, gargantuan, angry, friendly, beautiful. You could add all of these sort of properties to whatever you wanted in order to solve puzzles in more creative ways.
And it's funny to me to think about what the marketing of that could have been or must have been like for the second game. Of like, now, like, exciting update, adjectives. Like, it is an exciting update, to be clear. It's a cool mechanic for Scribblenauts. It's just like, imagine that as like a DLC pack, you know? Like, adjectives available now.
Well, I don't know if you could really do that as a DLC pack.
I know you couldn't. I'm just thinking of like the funny advertising potential of it.
It does fully change like a functionality of the game, so...
It does, although it sort of feels like that functionality is sort of already there underlying in the engine, which is why I get how they turned that around in a year. I'm sure it was hard. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me explain what Scribblenauts is, how it works real quick, if you haven't played. So in Scribblenauts, yeah, there's like little puzzles. Like you might see someone who's like, I want to sail the 7 seas, right? Like looking at the water. Or someone who's like, uh-oh, my car is broken. I need it to be fixed. And so then you, depending if you're on the DS or on your own console, you can either like write out the thing that you're wanting to do. Or in the game that I'm playing, it's more of a sort of like a rotary phone almost sort of system for it, basically.
It is? That sounds like it sucks.
That's not a perfect, like you use the joystick to like select, like, okay, I have like the A, B, C, or D, like it does 4 letters on each one, and then you press the one you want with the buttons.
Oh. I feel like just spawning the keyboard would be the better way to do that, but
this is, I think, faster than doing the keyboard once you get used to it, for what it's worth. So you might see that guy who wants to sail the 7 seas and, you know, spawn a boat, or a alligator, or I don't know, anything that you could think of that would float, right?
Yeah. And
you might see someone with a car that's broken, and you might, you know, give them a new engine, or you might spawn a mechanic, or you might, I don't know, just give them a new car, right? Yeah. And depending on sort of what the game is looking for the solution, any of those solutions, or in the games with adjectives, one thing I've been doing is I go in and I select the car, and I delete the adjective broken.
Yeah.
And it's just a car now, and it's fixed.
Yeah. That good creativity, Mel.
Thanks. I actually feel pretty boring when I do that. When I do that, I sort of feel like, oh, like, I'm taking the dumbest possible way to solve this and doing it.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was implying. Yeah.
Oh, dang. Wow. Yikes. Okay.
It does reward you, though, at least in the original game. I don't know how they brought this forward, but it does reward you for solving puzzles in multiple ways by giving you more of, like, the in-game currency, essentially, which you can use to, like, unlock more of Maxwell's brothers that you can play. And other
41 stuff. Brothers.
Yeah.
41 siblings, to be clear.
He has a sister, too, although I think in the one you're playing, she's just in, like, she's been turned to stone.
Yeah, right? She is in the process of being turned to stone, and apparently that's why we're collecting all this starite.
Yeah.
To save her from turn. It seems like I could just edit her to be not stone anymore, but we haven't thought of that. That would be kind of funny if like you could do that and then just like roll credits. Should probably try it.
Yeah.
In the one I'm playing though, you don't seem to get like currency for being creative, or maybe I've been so boring in doing it that I haven't.
It was more not for being creative, but for solving it multiple times in different ways.
Right. It's not clear to me that there is currency in the unlimited one.
Can you go back to the stages?
Well, it's like more open world, so you like kind of unlock more stages as you go, and there's like a lot of puzzles sort of scattered throughout the world, so it's a little different. Anyway,
yeah, but they're like all on one screen, right?
Sort of. You're like in the city, and you can like go into different places, and there are some puzzles, and there's like little puzzles and big puzzles. It's a slightly different energy than the first 3 that are pretty linear, I think. I in playing Unlimited, I sort of wanted the linear one, though.
Why?
It was like too overwhelming for me. There were too many puzzles, And like I appreciate that I could just like quit if I got stuck. There was one where it's like I was supposed to put something into like a picture frame, and I like kept spawning paintings, and that didn't work. And I tried to put other things in, like I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do. So like I appreciated being able to walk away, but it was just a little bit like the UI was a little clunky, basically. And so because of that, I sort of felt like, oh, like maybe just a linear one where I could just like walk to the right and solve puzzles as I go might be a little more my speed. But that's classic me. It's a classic Madelyn take.
Sure.
So Scribblenauts, like, I think some of the, like, so Scribblenauts is really interesting, right, because of this entire, like, this giant vocabulary system, which is something, like, I don't really feel like there's any other game that has quite attempted something quite like this.
I mean, there's not a lot of games where you just spawn something. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Scribblenauts was successful enough that you would think there would be like more knockoffs of it, I guess is what I mean to say.
That's true. I think the issue is when you get something that's as specific as this. You know, maybe it'll come back later. Maybe we're a couple years out from a new like indie take on Scribblenauts. Is basically what I'm thinking. Like I feel like if you made it then, it would be like, wow, you made Scribblenauts. Yeah, because you know there weren't that many games.
No, I think you're right. I think that's probably spot on. Like we're probably a few years away from the Scribble Renaissance.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, it very much came out of this period with Nintendogs and Brain Age of these sort of more casual games. I mean, the Nintendo DS era in general. And I wouldn't call Scribblenauts a casual game exactly, but it's definitely like taking inspiration from that, like, let's use the stylus kind of era of game. Which
I miss the DS.
Yeah.
So bad.
Bring it back. Bring it back for Emma. Bring back Styli just for Emma.
The DS is just such a good system. I don't know. It's so, you know, it's itself. You can make cool games on it.
Bring it back. Make a Steam Deck, but a DS one.
Yeah, like, you know, we have all these portable systems now, like the Switch and the Steam Deck. They're just the same. Just you hold them, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Emma's ready for like a 4-screen.
Even Nintendo, like, barely makes, like, motion-controlled games with their Switch anymore.
Hey, the WarioWare game.
I know, but that still counts as, like, barely to me. I think they should really lean into it.
That's rude to Wario, but okay. Anyway, Scribblenauts was originally supposed to, like, the original idea for Scribblenauts was even more ambitious and, like, frankly insane. Where it was inspired by Mad Libs, and you could like write a sentence on the bottom of the screen and things would happen. And it's like, how would you even do that at all?
Well, I mean, it just feels like it's like a couple steps beyond what Scribblenauts actually is. So
it's true, but it starts to get into melon territory, you know? I can't remember the name of that game.
Facade?
What?
Facade.
Yeah, it starts to get into facade territory.
Scribblenauts has its own melon issue. So.
Does it really?
Yeah. Not a fun one.
Can you just not summon it?
No, it's like so the way that they did it was usually they looked through Wikipedia for sort of synonyms and connections, because in one thread, which maybe we can talk about more later, they're like, it doesn't really matter if it works accurately, but more works as someone would expect it to work, right? Like they use the, like, spotting a cop, for example, in terms of like playing off stereotypes. If there was a monster, which people are supposed to run away from, but also a donut, it's funnier for the cop to go to the donut, right? And that's what sort of people would expect to happen anyway. So rather than like just looking through dictionaries and thesauruses and stuff, they were like scrolling through Wikipedia. And unfortunately in like doing all of these tens of thousands of words, right? While trying to avoid profanity. Like, if you're playing with that many words, things are going to slip by. And so there's a synonym that for watermelon in the game that's like spawns a melon that is like, it's a sambo, which is a kind of fruit, but is also like a racial slur that's sort of connected to watermelon too. So a little bit of oversight there, which can be hard to avoid, again, when you're dealing with like tens of thousands of words, unfortunately.
It's crazy that melons are really the downfall of all of these insert your own words games.
Apparently.
What a weird thing to share. As Emma mentioned, there are at least close to 23,000 words in Scribblenauts. Somebody mined the data at some point, and they said there were like 22,800, like back when it came out. But then the developer was like, no, there's more than that. So, especially with the adjectives added in the second one, it feels like there have to be close to like 30,000 or beyond words. There's some weird stuff in there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in reading a preview of the first game, which didn't even have adjectives in it, they were already saying tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So above, more than 10,000. And then they added adjectives. So I think more than 30,000 words, probably.
Which is wild. Why was I looking this up recently? I was wanting to look up recently, like, how many words does a person use, like, in an average day? Like, distinct words. It's
not that many.
Yeah, it's actually a lot lower than you would try to, like, give yourself credit for,
Yeah.
They did apparently spend, when they were developing it, like 3 to 6 months just, like, literally making a list of words, more or less.
Yeah, so there's a big recent thread from Liz England on the development of Scribblenauts, which she was the main object/dictionary designer, and it was her first shipped game in the industry. She works at Ubisoft now, I believe. And she said during Super Scribblenauts, she actually got her entire studio temporarily IP banned from Google because she was using the thesaurus feature too fast. And they thought she was a bot.
That's hilarious. Oops.
Yeah. The other thing is she did, like she said, that for that she did download like an entire public domain dictionary and took out all the adjectives and then sorted them all by hand.
The development of this game just seems wild.
Well, apparently it was pretty crunchy.
Yeah.
So, you'd look at Scribblenauts, people tend to think of crunch now as like people really striving for super realistic graphics, but if you're getting too complicated with your systems as well, even if the art style is as simple as Scribblenauts seems to be, you end up hitting the same sorts of problems, of course.
So the way the game works is they have their own sort of like engine that's, mostly vocabulary engine called the object not thing, where basically like they put in all these items and they also give them a bunch of properties, right? So like what they talked about, anything that's like an animal, right, or any mammal, I guess, is given the organic flesh property, right? Which means that like it can be eaten, you can turn it into meat, right? That's a pretty dark one, but it's the example that was given in an article that I read. So you might have like, here are things that have the bouncy property. Here are the things that have the floating property, whatever, right? Here's like soft. Here's a thing, I don't know, that's like luxurious or whatever. And then that way, by giving those kind of categories, they can just kind of tag everything with that. And hopefully then it solves puzzles the way that it should. Of course, the tricky thing is when you have tens of thousands of words, players are sometimes going to try to solve things creatively. That's the whole point of the game. And if you haven't anticipated the creative ways in which players are going to try to solve a specific puzzle, that can lead to frustration when people create something that feels like it should be a solution, but it's not.
Yeah, So this whole thread from Liz England that I talked about was mostly responding to, like, you know, you just stick Scribblenauts into a program and it works, right?
Yeah.
And she's saying, like, going over that, like, yeah, like, you know, you have animal, you have swimming, and then you check the can swim box or whatever. But because they were playing off, like, stereotypes and associations and cultural understandings of things, it turns out that you actually need, like, tons and tons of custom exceptions for specific puzzles or specific scenarios, like the cop thing that I just mentioned. Yeah. You know, like, if all humans have, like, the run from monster thing clicked, but if you want something funny, you know, you want something to, you know, amuse the player or change something, then you would, you know, have the cop go for the donut if the donut is also in the vicinity of the monster. Or she pointed out, like, vegetarians eating hamburgers, for example. So actually a lot of Scribblenauts was a lot of physical work, like custom handmade work, as opposed to just being a systems-based program.
And they also localized it into, like, 10 other languages.
Yeah.
Which seems like a nightmare,
yeah.
frankly.
Yes, it does.
Like, good for them. You do wonder, like, in that localizing, do you think any of the, like, do any of the boxes get changed? Right? Like, if there's assuming, I don't know, is the cop with a donut, like, a worldwide stereotype? Unclear.
Well, it is that's like a sort of Hollywood-y thing, so
I'm just using that as an example because I can't think of a better one. I'm like, what if in France, like, cops eating donuts, like, isn't a known stereotype, right? Or a known, it's not even like a stereotype, right? Like a known, I don't even know, like, joke. Trope. Like that, or, you know, it's just interesting. It's interesting to think about how challenging it would be to really localize this sort of a game correctly, especially given that, like, this team is, like, on the record saying, you know, we really couldn't QA everything. There's too many words, there's too many different ways they can be combined. We did the best we could, but we can't check everything because there's just too much.
Yeah, some of the common critiques of some of the games, I think, depending on how people engaged with it, was, like, it doesn't feel like it lets you be as creative as you want to be. But I read that and I'm like, how would they do that?
Yeah.
I can't imagine them being able to do more than what they've got already.
Well, it's a huge trade-off, right? Theoretically, you could make it so you could probably be more creative with some of the things that exist. But in order to do that, it seems like they would have to cut a big chunk of the dictionary. Right? Yeah. It was already interesting also to read about, you know, when does something get a custom, like, icon, basically. When does something get a custom avatar, right? Like they were talking about cheese, right? How, like, most cheese that you write in is going to come in, like, it's going to look the same, right? It's just going to look like cheese. Yep. But certain types of cheese that are, like, traditionally round have to look a little bit different. And category-wise, certain types of cheese that are, like, very stinky or polarizing in some way have to have different attributes. It's like, that's wild. That's wild. Yep. To decide, like, when are things similar enough that they can be the same and when are they not. Especially given that, like, the vast majority, like it feels like there have to be some words in the Scribblenauts dictionary that have never been used.
Probably, yeah.
So it's and they talked about this as a challenge for finding a publisher for the game as well, because most of the time, you know, if you're shopping around a game, you can, like, polish up a level, right? And the rest of the game, I mean, this is all, like, an oversimplification, obviously, right? But, like, if you can have, like, a solid, you know, 15 minutes of the game to show to someone, and the rest of the game doesn't have, maybe it even doesn't exist yet at all, right? But you've got like level 1 ready to go. But here they were saying like, well, what everyone wants from this game is to be able to put in weird words or like the exact word that they're thinking of and have it appear. So the problem for us was that like, even though, we could just show one level, we pretty much had to have the whole thing done because like, from the very beginning, you can like use everything. It's not like you unlock words as you go. And also, like, it's so weird to read. This era of games that we're doing in the podcast right now have, like, weird developer interviews. Yeah. Like, weird energy from the gaming outlets to the developers. You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's like the 2010s, right? So that makes sense.
It's like they always come in, and they all make jokes about this, too. They're like, ha ha ha, can I use this word? Can I use this word? And that's like the first 3 questions of the interview. And usually they're like, you must be so sick of this question. And he's like, haha, of course not. But it does seem like the energy around Scribblenauts, like a lot of the time was like, like I can break this. Like, let me find something that like a word that I want to put in that doesn't show up, sort of thing. So you understand like you understand where that crunch must have come from, because the amount of sort of like, but like I can outsmart this game. Like this game can't have this word. Definitely that energy is there.
Anyway, 2016, their mobile title, Scribblenauts Fighting Words, was canceled, and they laid off most of their staff. And then there was another round of layoffs. And then the Scribblenauts party game was made by a different company and also sucked, apparently.
Yeah.
Fifth Cell is technically still around. They seem to have released like a free-to-play tactical thing a couple years ago, but I do not think they will be returning to Scribblenauts.
Which is sad. It's sad to see things like this just like totally die.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we move on?
I have one last thing to say. I need viewer opinion on this. The original title of the game was going to be Wordplay, which I kind of like. I mean, terrible SEO. No,
terrible
really?
SEO.
I mean, the SEO is bad, but I think it's clever. I think it's a clever title.
I mean, sure, it's clever. You could do it as like a subtitle, but you wouldn't want that to be your main title.
Yeah. Okay. Last note. This one, actually, a few last few quick fun facts for me, and then I'll be ready to go. Number 1, has a strategy guide from Prima Games.
Of course.
Which is so... imagine being the guide person for this game.
It does feel kind of like... There's so many different ways, especially once you introduce adjectives, there's so many different ways you can solve puzzles that it does feel like following a guide is a little like... Why are you playing this?
I know. Well, that's one thing. I just can't imagine being the guide writer for something like this. Like,
I mean, in some ways it's easy. You just have to be like, okay, here's like 3 solutions that are easy.
Like, I guess so, but you also want to be like finding the Easter eggs for people so that they buy your guide, right? It just feels like, oh man, this must be grindy in a really weird way.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay, fun fact number 2. I did just want to read from the ESRB's description of possible like game violence things. A club can be used to hit an animal. Stake can be attached to a baby to attract lions. Yep. Rockets can be lobbed at a man.
Yes.
Hence E10+.
Yeah, it's very cartoon violence.
And finally, you aren't allowed, there aren't really licensed characters or profanities or anything, as Emma said. There are certain versions of the game, depending on what platform that comes out, that a few licensed characters, like Mario and Link, I think, can appear on some of the Nintendo releases.
And there's the DC one as well.
Right. Of course, the DC one is nothing but licensed stuff. But they did get sued by the creators of Nyan Cat and Keyboard Cat. Because they included those and they are trademarked. So ultimately WB Games had to pay to license those to keep them in the game.
Well,
so if you're playing Scribblenauts, be sure to take advantage of that, because they had to pay for it.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, you know, with all those words, again, you're going to overlook something, but, like, even, like, words that are just nouns now, you know, like popsicle.
Yep.
That's not in the game, because it's technically...
Popsicle is trademarked, really?
Yeah, that was one specific example from the first one.
Wow, that's one I didn't even know. Like, there are things that I know.
Xerox.
Right. Xerox is one, and, you know, like, there are definitely ones that I know that are like, oh, that's a trademark, and we use it, and we shouldn't. I did not even realize that popsicle...
Yes.
You call it like ice pop?
Yeah.
Dang. Well, on that disturbing note, let's head over to Chained Echoes.
Yeah. I played this winter.
Nice.
Came out last December. It's a role-playing video game inspired by the old RPGs coming out of Japan, like the Final Fantasies, Skies of Arcadia, Xenogears, Suikoden's, Breath of Fire, whatever. Just, you know, whatever you're thinking of probably served as an inspiration for this. It's very traditional. It's got turn-based combat, 16-bit visuals, big sprawling multi-character narrative with multiple party members and various kingdoms and political stuff going on.
It's made by one dude.
Yeah. Mostly. The story, gameplay, most of the art is by one dude. There's also a composer who apparently helped with various other things. And near the end of development, he did hire some people for assistance on finishing up artwork, apparently. And also published by Deck 13 Spotlight, who presumably helped as well.
Right. I can't believe we're wading into the RPGs from Japan discourse right now. Here. The developer of this game is German.
Yes.
But, like, very, very inspired, obviously.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Like, I totally see why dropping JRPG makes sense. Because in some ways for modern games, that doesn't really tell you anything anyway.
Yeah.
RPG itself doesn't really tell you anything, to be perfectly honest.
Well, not anymore. I mean, God, not to wade into that discourse, too. But, like, obviously we're having this conversation about Final Fantasy 16 right now.
Yeah. RPG means too many different things. But it's really interesting to read, like, interviews with him where he is referring to his own game as a JRPG, right?
Yeah.
When, if you're going off of the technical definition of the term, no, it's not, right? You're German. You're not making a JRPG.
JRPG.
A GRPG.
It would be ideal if we could find another J word that was, like, appropriate to sub in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's not one. I can't think of one. But a jelly RPG.
Usually what they mean is turn-based RPGs. Classic turn-based RPGs is essentially.
Yeah, but there's, like, a little more to it than that.
I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it is just interesting to see. It has become something that's sort of like, we're doing this to the word anime now, too.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, theoretically, these were initially words that we used to designate, like, a region, and now we've just come to use it for, like, a style as well. But it's sort of messy to use them that way. Anyway, even.
Because it's, like, half style things, half who made it.
Yeah.
It's like, you can do this with food, too. Right? Like, it's only a Chardonnay if it's from the Chardonnay region of France or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let you describe more of the plot of this game, right? But it's like, you're in a fantasy kingdom and the kingdom is tense. The three kingdoms are tense.
So how it starts is you start playing as Glenn, who is a member of this mercenary troop who has been hired in a war between two kingdoms to go and destroy the magical MacGuffin that the other kingdom is using. However, the thing that they're destroying is not in fact what they think it is, and so Glenn accidentally sets off like a nuclear explosion in the kingdom that they're in, bringing the war to a halt for now. Because because and so it picks up, you meet a couple of different characters. There's Len, who's like a runaway princess from another kingdom, who is undercover as just like seeing the world as a princess, right? To like learn what's up everywhere with her devoted servant Rob alongside her. There's Victor, who is like an immortal playwright of sorts, who's here to have a good time and maybe have some sort of, hidden agenda behind the back as well. And then there's Sienna, who is like a thief, mysterious thief who also gets wrapped up in things. And all of these characters sort of clash together in one night when a big monster attacks the castle of the kingdom they're in, and they end up going on a journey together.
I have to say that, of the like little things that feel like homages, Glenn is such a spot-on name. Like Glenn has big Clive energy.
It does.
I know we're doing like the 90s ones, and the characters in the 90s maybe had slightly weirder names, but I'm like, Glenn, that's it. That hits.
That's right. It hits. It gets a lot, like, what I would think is my main critique of Chained Echoes, having played it, is it has a lot of, like, complicated ideas and lore and history to the world, which, like, theoretically good, but if you're writing a story, not all of those things can impact the main plot. Is too much. It pulls focus around, and to me, without getting into spoiler territory, it starts to lose a lot of steam by the ending because it keeps introducing new ideas, and like feels like it's sort of hurrying there a little bit, which is maybe a symptom of, this being a largely solo project that's like over 40 hours long.
Yeah.
So there's that as well.
How did you find the combat system? The combat system is the like thing that everybody loves.
Yeah, so it's pretty traditionally turn-based in how you do it. You have 4 characters at a time, and you can also have characters that can swap out with each character currently on the field. So you can have like 8 active in your party at once. I think it was 8.
That sounds familiar.
You get like, there's like 6 or 7 main party members. Then there's some optional ones you can also pick up by doing some of the side content. This is something I forgot to look into. So the side content like plays back into the main story in interesting ways, but I'm very confused as to how it would work if you didn't do the side quests, because it didn't seem like you had to, even though I did, but then they come up again in the main story like you did those side quests, and now that is impacting the main story. So it doesn't have more than one ending, so I'm very curious how that works if you don't do side quests. But anyway, setting that to the side. So the main thing is you're managing this overdrive gauge that you have at the top, which is essentially like there's a period of like where you're not in overdrive, period where you're in overdrive, and a period where you're in overheat as you go further right and left on the thing. So every action that you do, a normal attack pushes it a little bit to the right, a skill attack pushes it more to the right, guarding pushes it a little to the left, swapping out your character pushes it a little to the left, and they'll also show like there's like a skill icon once you're in overdrive that if you use that type of skill, it will also push it a lot to the left. So essentially what you're doing is trying to balance your skill uses and character swaps in order to keep yourself in the overdrive state without going into overheat or falling out of overdrive again. So when you're in overdrive, basically you take less and do more damage. When you're not, it's just normal. When you're in overheat, you take more and do less damage, essentially. It's a pretty good system. The other way it also works is it's like a one battle. It's you don't manage your resources, right? So you heal after every battle. So there's like less battles than you would necessarily find in an RNG thing. But they last longer, which again, towards the end, starts to be like, stop.
Yeah.
I remember saying, like, I turned the difficulty down a little at the end because I was just like, I don't want to stop throwing me at grunts. I just let me get to the end, please. But so each battle is a little bit more involved, and there's a few less of them as well.
I do, as a classic sort of like resource hoarder, I do like at least the idea behind you heal every battle.
Yeah, it's like a trade-off, right? Of like, if you don't heal after every battle, you probably want battles to be faster because, if you're going from place to place, you don't want your players to be like constantly running out of resources because they have to keep healing them. Unless it's like, that would be weird to work in like Persona because theoretically it's supposed to encourage you to like leave and come back at some points. Right. So it depends on your system. The overdrive thing was fun. It was good to have something to think about beyond just like, attacking or whatever and managing people's health. I do wish there were only a couple of boss fights that messed with like the placement of the overdrive. Like there was a couple that would break it into like 3 sections. So you'd have like 3 overdrive slots with overheat slots in different places. And I felt like they did not play with that enough to like mix up the way that you would, balance your attacks, essentially, like the rhythm of fights. Yeah.
Well, maybe in Unchained Echoes.
Yeah. I also found any battle with like when enemies attack you, your overdrive gauge also goes up. So like any battle with like more than like 3 enemies was hellish, and I hated them. Just because of the way the system worked. But those are my main critiques of it, I think. Overall, it's a pretty fun system.
I did, and relevant to past side quest, I liked hearing the developer talk about, this is a game that's obviously like inspired by these 90s games, right? And games inspired by old school RPGs are very in right now, I think. And but I liked that he talked specifically about how like he was trying to copy what it felt like to play those games. Right? Not literally go back and be like, I'm going to make a game that feels like it could have released in the 90s. It's, I'm going to copy this and try to make a game that feels like you would have felt in the 90s playing one of these games.
Yeah. That's always sort of a dangerous game to talk about. I often see, like, people inspired by older games and people get a little bit, like, tetchy whenever these developers, like, imply that they're, like, fixing things about those games, right? It's like they're old games. There's room for improvement. I don't think they necessarily mean it in a negative, holier than thou way, but people do get a little bit touchy about that. So I think the way that he tried to put it was probably the best way of like trying to recreate how you remember feeling playing those games.
It was surprising to me. I mean, this game was a real like surprise hit, right?
Yeah.
It was surprising to me how many of those reviews were like, this is as good as Final Fantasy VI or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know anything about, like, these games are before my time, so I have no attachment to them. But it was interesting to me to see how many of these were, like, ready to come out and be like, yeah, absolutely, you're going to feel like it was from that era. Like, you're going to feel like you missed this hidden gem, like, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
was like, that's bold.
It's always interesting talking about, like, mainly one-person type projects. You know, we can remember my experiences with Iconoclasts as an example. I feel like
Throwback, wow, Iconoclast, and for the real old school folks.
Listen, a lot of people love Iconoclasts, right? And I feel like when you're playing something that is, like, mainly from one person's mind, in terms of all aspects, right?
Yeah.
It's either, like, you are on a similar wavelength to this person, or you're not.
Yeah.
You know? As opposed to projects that have many different voices involved and many different people working on them, where you might, you know, feel like, oh, I like some of this, you know, or I like this.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like with one-person projects, you're much more liable to be like, oh, I love this, or, oh, this really isn't for me,
Yeah.
you know? Which, for what it's worth, on Chained Echoes, I come down a little closer to this wasn't for me. But I know there are a lot of people that really love this game, too. So that shouldn't be, like, a huge deterrent if you're feeling nostalgic or anything like that.
There was apparently some Metacritic review bombing drama with this recently.
God, on every game now.
Yeah.
Was it, like, console war nonsense?
It's not clear. It seemed like it wasn't clear what was going on. Potentially console war. Or they were speculating it might be, like, people expressing their displeasure that it hadn't been localized in their language, but it was just user review, like, ratings, no reviews. So the publisher was sort of like, we don't know what this is, but, like, it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like on every game now you get, like, just don't pay any attention to the user rating on Metacritic, to be honest. Or Rotten Tomatoes, or anything. They're just meaningless now. People just use them for, like, nonsense, as
Don't
opposed
pay
to
attention
actually...
to users. No
Don't
users.
pay attention to users. No, I think individual reviews can be helpful, right? But, like, I think just, like, looking at the percentage and being like, oh, it's really green, it must be good, or oh, it's really red, it must be bad, is just, like, not something you can do.
I feel like as a society we need to get back into sports.
Why?
I feel like Metacritic review scores have become
It's like sports betting?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
it's
a little
like,
bit.
My game is winning. My movie is winning. Or I want this game to lose. No, let's just get back into baseball.
Yeah, you're right. We should just get back into baseball. We just need to go outside more, really, I think.
Let's just all touch grass.
I mean, you know, we had a period where we weren't allowed to go out and touch grass, so... I know it's hard.
Yeah, they made it illegal. You're right, Emma. Yeah.
We were afraid to go out and touch grass. How about that? Talking about, you were talking about, like, the Scribblenauts in, like, making, like, a vertical slice. They sort of felt like they had to make everything, right? And that reminded me, like, I was reading an interview on GameDeveloper.com with Matthias Linda, the dev behind it, talking about how, like, you know, this was a Kickstarter game, but before he launched it, he was, you know, trying to build an audience on social media, because you have to, if you're launching a Kickstarter campaign, you sort of have to do that first. You can't just, like, throw it into the void, because it probably will not will not happen that way. He talked a lot about how, you know, he's working on everything, but because he was trying to build an audience on social media, a lot of the times he was prioritizing things that would look good in a GIF or GIF, whatever you want to say. And so I thought that was really interesting, of, like, you know, having to think about, even while you're developing it, like, the marketing of your game, how you're selling it before it's even, like, done. right?
Yeah.
Sort of sucks. Not like he sucks for doing it. I totally get it. Like, just the situation of having to do that in order to actually make this thing feels like it sort of sucks.
Reading some of his interviews generally just sort of like right before, he just sounds so tired. Like,
I mean, he worked on this for, it's like 7 years, not 7 years full time. He started it like full time after the Kickstarter was successful, basically. But yeah, trying to do something that's like, you know, over 40 hours long, Final Fantasy length, mostly by yourself, is, I think, ultimately not a great idea for anyone who doesn't like really think they could work that way, you know?
Yeah. No, it was just so many quotes where he was like, you know, like, yes, I guess I'm excited for it to be out, but mostly I'm excited to not have to be checking everything every day anymore.
Yeah, and his interviews also were like, I think next time we can bring some people on.
Yeah.
I've done my 7 years of solo work. Next game project, maybe I can work with some people.
I also really like all the articles about it because, you know, his last name is Linda, and so I really like all the articles that just sound like it's like a senior woman who no.
Linda, age 50. Yeah.
Well, are you ready to mash?
Yeah. Let's do it.
The Indie Scribblenauts revival that you requested.
Yeah. We just take Scribblenauts and add the indie property to it. The indie adjective.
Scribblenauts.
Yeah. And that's good. We got it.
I'm afraid that what I'm about to suggest is probably the Scribblenauts party game that everyone hated and I didn't read very much about. But
How are you getting a party game out of this?
Is the game that came out, the most recent one, not a party game? I thought it was.
No, it is. I'm just wondering what are you taking out of Chained Echoes to make it into a party game?
I'm thinking of, like, it's a turn-based, like, battle game where every turn you have a certain amount of, like, words you can use to, like, create your weapon or action or army or whatever.
Oh, you know, there is a game like this that is coming out.
You're kidding me.
I saw it in Summer Games Fest. I have the demo downloaded right now. I think it's called Leximan. Where it's like you're casting, like you have like word parts and like you put those up into a full word and then he casts like that spell, essentially.
Yeah.
So good, they did it. Good idea.
I would like a game like that, but it's about like being a thief, and it should be called Lexicon. This is why I liked the title Wordplay. So I was like, that's the title I would have come up with.
Lexicon also not very good SEO.
I know it's not, but it's clever.
Now in marketing, we gotta sell this. We gotta do our Kickstarter.
No. No more marketing. I've had to do so much marketing this month. I can't do any more marketing. Lexicon.
Sorry.
It's okay. Oh, I got it. I got the title for my game, actually. My game where you fight with words.
Sure.
Dictionarmy.
There you go.
I think that's pretty good.
I think it should be like Diction-Army.
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
For readability purposes.
Render it however you want. I was thinking of it like all caps, like diction, then army in all caps.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is basically just taking the Firaga kind of system and just scribblenauting it, but that's okay. Like, those are just adjectives.
You're right. Those are just adjectives. That is the Scribblenauts way.
Unfortunately, I think a real, like, turn-based combat thing where you can, like, summon as many things as that are in the dictionary of Scribblenauts would be very broken.
Yeah. I do think it would be hard to balance, also.
Well, I think, like, different words would have to have different, like, magic point values. You know, you can, like, summon a tank, but, like, then you're not going to be able to have a turn for 3 turns.
I see.
Otherwise, yeah, you could just like immediately summon God every level and just be done.
Yeah. God does beat the devil in Scribblenauts.
Oh, nice. That's a theological stance.
They did. They were saying that in the interview. They were talking about it. They're like, I'm not a Satanist, so we decided that probably God should beat Satan.
Probably the ESRB decided that.
The ESRB they didn't want religion at all. They were probably like, get God out of there. Kick God back where he belongs.
Not in my video game.
Not in video games.
I don't know. Do you have any better ideas than my writing combat game?
I think it would just have to be like a lot more limited than Scribblenauts is.
And like, I feel like that's okay. I just really
or maybe
wonder...
maybe, you know, you were saying like you don't like learn new words as you go along in Scribblenauts, but maybe that's how it should work.
Yeah.
In this. Like more of like, you know, you're learning skills, so you're learning like new words.
I'm not sure how you would manage that though. While still preserving... Like, I wouldn't want this to be like the max vocabulary amount is like 100 words. Like, for this game to work, the amount of vocabulary you have access to still, it doesn't necessarily have to be as wide as Scribblenauts. Like, I don't need to be able to put like an ophthalmologist in there.
Maybe we just
wide.
We put more of the onus on art and just have more broad categories. So you can have things that look differently, but like will function exactly the same way.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, in terms of like combat abilities. So you can have like some aesthetic creativity, but like your shark shooter functions the same way as a normal gun.
And I think you could probably help yourself a little bit by saying like, this is going to be a fantasy thing. Like, if we can say, like, okay, like, I'm not gonna have, like, no computers, right? Like, no, like, if I can limit it to an earlier period of time, that might help as well. Because then it's easier for the game to be like, I don't know what a customer service representative is. Or something, you know?
There you go, yeah.
I feel like there's something here. I feel like you said that somebody already made it, so I hope for their sake there's something here. You'll have to report back once you play the demo.
Sure, yeah. Do that next week.
Next week! That was as good a segue as any. Folks, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Next week, like Emma said, it's 6 weeks of gaming. So get ready for some Katamari. Because it's unbelievable how Katamari appears when we need it. Here. At Talk This NYC HQ.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a move happening, it's like, Katamari is there to roll things up. So look forward to
that would be a convenient way of packing.
I don't know how you'd get that on a plane. It would accidentally roll up the plane. Then what would you do? It would only add like 2 centimeters to it, too.
Yeah.
Anyway, stay tuned next week for our 6 weeks in gaming. But let me get back to my normal spiel. If you enjoyed this episode, you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, really anywhere that you can find podcasts. Wherever you found the podcast today, go ahead and like and subscribe to Talk This. So next week, like I said, 6 weeks in gaming. But Emma, what will we be talking about in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about Klonoa for our old game.
Mm-hmm.
And Hi-Fi Rush for our new game.
Nice. That is Xbox exclusive, right?
Yes. I mean, it might be on PC, but that doesn't
Okay.
matter to you anyway.
Well, the PC is an Xbox to me.
Right.
Like, those are the same to me.
Yes.
Well, that's it for this week's show. Folks, thanks for listening. Emma, do you want to scribble one last little message here?
This week, I hope you are able to add as many adjectives as you want to yourself.